Hi guys, and welcome back to the Redcoat History YouTube channel, the place for people who love to learn about and share the stories of the British Army. Please subscribe, and if you enjoy this interview then do share it with friends and family and help the channel to grow. Today is the fourth instalment of my conversation with the historian of the Anglo-Sikh Wars, Amarpal Singh. In the previous episodes we covered the rise of the Sikh Empire, the reasons for war and the battles of Mudki and First Shah. Absolutely fascinating stuff that is little known or talked about these days. So let's find out what happened after that brutal fight at First Shah.
The British force sort of recuperated for about 6-7 weeks. So First Shah was on the 21st December, and you had the Battle of Sobraon, which was the last battle, on the 10th of February. So that sort of 6-7 week period was a time when, Gough sort of managed to get, more reinforcements, more supplies and more guns. And so basically readied himself for the final conflict in the battle. On the Sikh side, though, things were getting worse because they weren't getting any reinforcements. They weren't getting food supplies. There was a lot going on behind the scenes to sort of weaken the army still further. In fact, during the Battle of Sobraon, a lot of the Sikh artillery shells, for instance, were found to be defective. There wasn't, instead of gunpowder, there was sacks of, sand or other stuff being sent and stuff like that.
And this was all part of this big sort of scheme of treachery from various sort of political types.
That's right. Yes. Basically, they were probably surprised that the Sikh army still existed at this point. They'd actually done better than they should have done in First Shah, considering they weren't being managed at all. But yeah, I mean, this was a time when the army still needed to be destroyed. So yes, there was no help coming along. But morale was still pretty high. If you read sort of first-hand accounts of the Sikh army at Sobraon, they were still confident that they could do it. I mean, they managed to almost beat the British at First Shah. So they were sure they could do it again. What they didn't know was that the Sikh commanders had decided to split the Sikh army again. One portion of the Sikh army was actually, about 10,000 men, 10 to 15,000 men were actually pushed back across the border river, the Sutlej River. They settled on this sort of entrenched area just next to the river, with the river at their back. Anyone who knows anything about sort of military history will tell you that the last thing you want to do is, be fighting with a river behind you and a powerful enemy in front of you. But that's how they planned it. So half the Sikh army was, crossed over in this entrenchment, and the other half of the army would just sit there on the opposite bank, the Sikh side of the river. And effectively, in the coming battle, they would take no sort of active part in it. So only half the army would fight at Sobraon.
So this is a strange question, perhaps, but what was this? What was the reasoning behind this? The Sikh army's penchant for digging in. It seems like they liked digging into these sort of fortified positions. Was that just again part of this plan to deliberately sort of keep the army in one place so it could be destroyed, or was this a traditional Sikh tactic?
Well, the Sikh army was good at fighting on the defensive, but I think it was mainly a decision by, the commanders and the officers to simply stay on the defensive all the time. So all the battles that you see in the First Anglo-Sikh War, the Sikh army is always fighting on the defensive, even when they have the chance to actually take the initiative. That was the case. And even in the Second War, although the situation in the Second War was different because the Sikh army was considerably weaker. So, you can make a case for fighting on the defensive there. But certainly in the First War, the Sikh army was strong enough to have taken the initiative. And in fact, they could have attacked the British force at First Shah again, as Gough was waiting for these considerable reinforcements. He got 16,000 men coming in, during January. I think it was under Sir John Grey. from Meerut, and you had Sir Charles Napier coming in, up from Sindh province as well with another 15,000 men. So you had a huge number of men, who were sort of reinforcing him. So ideally, the Sikh army should have attacked before these forces got together, but no, that just wasn't the case with that's just not what the generals wanted.
Yeah. So they're now dug in, half the army on one side of the river, half on the other. The British army is getting stronger opposite them under Gough. How does the battle finally take shape, and what happens?
Okay, well, another bit of treachery here. Lal Singh and Tej Singh actually communicated to the British that the Sikh right wing, right next to the river, was almost completely undefended, and this was communicated to the British. So there was no guns there, hardly any men there. Most of the Sikh force was actually kept in the front and to the south. So the right flank was exceptionally weak, and the British checked with their own spies as well, and that was confirmed. So the idea was to have an overwhelming force on the British left to attack that flank, and then literally just attack the main Sikh line from the back, and that would effectively
sort of envelop them and just roll up the whole line.
That's right. Yes. Once you've got through into the back of the rear of the entrenchment, the Sikh line would either be attacked from the back, or they'd have to try and retire somewhere. So that was a plan, and that's the way it worked on the day, 10th of February. And the battle lasted a couple of hours. It wasn't a very long battle. As soon as the British had got in behind the Sikh line, the Sikh soldiers had to retire. There was a bridge to cross back to the Sikh side of the river, the Sikh territory. When you're in the middle of a battle, you're not going to get that many men sort of crossing back on the bridge. And there's reports that was sort of sabotaged by Lal Singh and Tej Singh anyway. So not many men would have made it over anyway. So basically, most of the Sikh force was actually pushed into the river at that stage. And you had, estimates were that, pretty much all this force, around 10,000 men, were, either shot in the river or drowned. So, a big massacre, ending the final battle of the war, really. So, yeah.
And so casualty figures were that high, were they? I mean, what are the estimates of Sikh casualty figures? How many people actually survived that slaughter?
Well, there was a few hundred that managed to cross over, but you're talking about the British force literally lining the side of the bank of the river and just literally firing in with guns and their muskets. So it's very difficult to escape from that. The river was also quite swollen at that time. There'd been sort of heavy rains. It was a swollen river, so it was as bad as it could be, really. Fast flowing, a lot of water, not much chance to really swim across to the other bank. So very few men made it. So yeah, I can believe that British estimate of about 10,000 men being either drowning or being shot. And Sikh soldiers never surrendered. Even when they were offered the chance to surrender. So there were no prisoners taken at that stage.
Because one of
in fact, Gough. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I was going to say one of the things I found really interesting in your book were these stories. For example, there was a sepoy who left his own recollections of the battle. I think he was also at Sobraon. And he said he realized something was wrong when he did see Sikhs trying to surrender. And then he would often realize they were Europeans fighting for the Sikhs who were the ones trying to surrender, because the Sikh soldiers themselves would never surrender.
That's right. Yes. I think it was more, it's more, I think they were used to fighting the Afghans. the Sikh soldiers, so for their entire history, the last thing you want to do is be taken prisoner by the Afghans. So this idea of being taken prisoner was not on the cards, and and it just became a sort of a thing that you just don't do, But yeah, there was a sort of fair scattering of Europeans, primarily sort of Frenchmen and some sort of English soldiers, in the Sikh ranks as well, and they weren't very well treated. Anytime they saw a British soldier, in Sikh army uniform, that's right, yeah. I think you said it right there. No chance to surrender. They just saw them as traitors, essentially. But yeah, it must have been absolutely horrendous on the riverbank there. And of course, the other half of the Sikh army was still stationed on the right bank, and I think they must have been very frustrated that they're not being allowed to help. There was Sikh artillery on the right bank of the river, but they weren't allowed to fire. There was literally no fire coming across the river, which would have helped, the Sikh soldiers, because the British had bought their guns, but these were just light, horse artillery guns to the riverbank, not the heavy guns. So they could have very easily prevented, the British from massacring these soldiers, but
yeah, wow,
unfortunately, the case.
And so we've heard about Sikh casualties. Did the British also suffer heavy casualties, or did they get let off very lightly?
Okay, well, the British had about 2,500 casualties with about 300 dead. So, not too bad. It was an easy win at the end of the day. There's no way around that one. But, there was a quite substantial sort of artillery exchange before the British advance. And so apparently that was quite successful, on both sides. So I'm guessing a lot of the casualties would have been taken at that point. And certainly the British had problems to a certain extent, not on the Sikh right flank, but on the Sikh left flank. At that point, I think it was at the HM 29th, I think, they actually literally had to attack the Sikh entrenchment about 4 times before they managed to get in. So, but overall, yeah, it could have been a lot worse.
So the British have essentially slaughtered a big chunk of the Sikh army at this point. This is the last major engagement of the war, is that right? And then what happened after the battle?
Yes, this was the last battle. The Sikh army had effectively lost most of their artillery by now. They had about 20-30 guns on their side, but that's it really. It's a spent force. They're not getting any ammunition or anything from Lahore. Lahore itself is only about 20-30 miles down the road, once you cross the river. And so the British, the day after the battle, had their bridge of boats ready at Firozpur. And they crossed the river, and within 2-3 days, they'd sort of marched to Lahore, effectively brought, an end to the war, really. The conditions, I think it was 15 million rupees had to be paid to the British, as sort of
like reparations.
As reparations. But it wasn't just that. The British had the intention of splitting up the empire as well, sort of, effectively weaken it. So the area from, the Himalayas up to the river Beas, which is called the Doab area, quite a fertile area. It's where the Indian Punjab is now, effectively. That area was basically annexed by the British, and they also separated Kashmir as well, the whole of Kashmir from the Punjab. So that left just the rump of the Punjab itself as the Sikh Empire going into, the Second Anglo-Sikh War. So yeah, quite a radical change there, quite a weakening. The British also insisted on the Sikh army being reduced. I think it's to about 30,000 men from that sort of peak of about 70,000-80,000 men, and more if you count the irregulars. So they weakened the force effectively, and the Sikh army, for the next 2-3 years, effectively just became a sort of border security force, after the British takeover. Most of them were sort of stationed along the Afghanistan border to make sure there's no sort of incursions by these tribes. But it sort of ended it as a fighting force.
And then this is probably beyond the scope of the interview. It's more as much as anything for me, really. I noticed there's not a lot of Sikh sources. Did you find any Sikh sources at all, like first-hand accounts of the battles and things?
There are Sikh sources, Chris, but there's few. And I suppose, it's always going to be that way, simply because, a lot of the Sikh soldiers wouldn't have been great writers, shall we say. They were sort of plucked from there were farmers, or Jats as we call them. A lot of them were, sort of men of the soil, if you like. So they wouldn't have written very much themselves, historically, if you like. There are a few letters and things. What we do have is the official Lahore sources, the Lahore records. Unfortunately, these Lahore records are written in Persian, because that was the lingua franca of the time. So it's very difficult for the common man to sort of decode these. And the other thing is they're actually in Lahore now, which is in Pakistan. So it's very difficult for chaps like me to go there. We're not locals, and actually go through these resources. But if anyone does, there's a huge number of stories there that documents and facts and figures that nobody's actually really accessed, I think, in earnest. So the huge number of stories there, including the chaps you were talking about, European adventurers in Punjab and what they did, and their stories as well. So yeah.
Well, it's
trying to learn Persian.
I was about to say, it's kind of exciting but tragic to think there could be so much there that no one's really had a chance to go through, and maybe we'll have to pool our resources and hire a local Pakistani who speaks Persian to go and take notes of all of them for us.
That's right. Yeah. I think that's the case with all Indian archives, actually. British archives, obviously very easy to access, and they're written in written in English. But there's archives in Punjab, East Punjab, in places like Patiala and stuff, and there's archives, for the Indian states, Hyderabad and Mysore and what have you, everywhere, and they haven't really been accessed as well as they, so there's a huge number of stories there, and information and data which hasn't really been accessed. So British archives are really sort of have been sort of mined quite heavily by British historians, but the other side of the story hasn't. So hopefully at some stage.
So you've visited most of these battlefields, is that right? And what are they like to visit? If someone's listening now and they get a chance to go, are they going to find the battlefields similar to how they would have been on the days of the fighting?
No, unfortunately, they've changed quite a lot, Chris. The population of India being what it is, you're getting all these villages are sort of, exploding in size, really, aren't they? The population growth and what have you. A lot of the jungles that we used to have, in India are gone. So all the jungled area around Firozshah, Mudki, that's all gone now. It's all cultivated sort of land now. The only place that's almost what it was like, in those days is Sobraon. And the reason for that is that it's very close to the river, and it's, the soil there is not sort of the type that, you can grow things on, simply because it floods. You're very close to the river, and it's that floodplain thing. And that's probably the most atmospheric battlefield that you can go to. If you stand on the riverbank there, you can just imagine this sort of final scene where, it's a sort of destruction of the Sikh army there. But having said that, if you do go to Punjab, the British built the war monuments there. Mudki, Firozshah, Sobraon, Aliwal, you've got the British monument still there. So that gives you an idea, of the battlefield and where things were. But for that, you really need to, look at maybe the battlefield guide in my book, or maybe somebody else comes up with something as well to get, where things happened. So, so all you've got is a monument there. It doesn't really tell you what happened where. Some of these places are quite large. Aliwal, the fighting took place from one end to another. It was probably about 5-6 miles, from the battlefield itself right to the end of the battle at the banks of the river. That's right, 5-6 miles. So, it's the monuments help, but you need to sort of decode further than that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, when I win the lottery, I'll fly us both out. We'll make a documentary there. How does that sound?
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, yeah. It's I think it's your forte. I think definitely you as a front man. I think.
Oh no, I think we'd have to be the pair of us. I think we'd have to do it together. We'd play off each other. I think it'd be fun. we just need to win the lottery, and we'll do it.
Well, that wraps up our talks on the First Anglo-Sikh War. Eventually, Amarpal and I will also discuss the Second Anglo-Sikh War, so do watch this space. Until then, please share this episode, check out my website over at redcoathistory.com, and let's spread these stories to a wider audience. The soldiers of both sides who gave their lives deserve to be remembered.